Hi everybody, my name's Dawnmarie Gaivin, and I am thrilled to present to you the 5 pitfalls of being a new spelling parent and how to avoid them. Before I begin though and introduce myself, I want to tell you a quick story about this little boy whose name is Evan. When he was 12 years old, his mom started teaching him how to spell to communicate. Actually, to be fair, 3 years earlier, she knew about the method and had started trying to teach him how to spell because she thought that was a prerequisite to spelling on a letterboard. Have to spell on a letterboard. She did not understand apraxia, she did not understand the brain-body disconnect, and she was going it alone, reading everything she could read and trying to figure it out on her own. Then she met a practitioner who worked with Evan for a couple days and then sent her home with some letterboards to do the best she could. And for the next 6 months, every time she pulled out the letterboards, when she could squeeze in time to work on the skill acquisition, Evan would spell 1 or 2 words, and he would then slide out of his chair and lay face down on the floor. Sometimes moaning and groaning, sometimes tantruming, sometimes totally silently, just sort of squatter's rights, civil disobedience, laying on the floor, refusing to participate. Mom would try to stay calm. She'd eventually just pack up the stuff, start to put it away. He would immediately sit up. He'd sign more. He'd sit down in the chair next to her, pick up the pencil, and give her the board. So they'd start again, and then 2 words into it, he'd slide out of the chair and lay on the floor, and it would start over and over and over again. This experience left this mom feeling isolated, incompetent, unsure about what to do next, and really feeling like this is yet another path she's gone down that is not going to yield any results for her son, who is still desperately lacking a meaningful and productive way to communicate his thoughts. So now about me. That little boy, Evan, of course, as many of you might already know, is my son, who is now 17 years old and a fluent speller on a letterboard. At 12 years old, as I mentioned, we started this journey, and we were sort of self-taught with a little bit of help every 6 months from a practitioner, and hit a lot of pitfalls along the way. So the webinar that I put together today is really about my journey, and I think I've seen over the years practicing as an S2C practitioner, I'm not alone, and that a lot of these things are what you have experienced or are experiencing too. So I want to share what has worked instead of these pitfalls or how to avoid them so that maybe my experience can benefit you in the long run. Okay, so without further ado, I'm Dawnmarie Gaivin. I live in San Diego, California. I have 2 boys on the spectrum, Evan, who's 17, and his brother, Trey, who will be 16 very soon. They are both considered non-speakers. Evan is completely non-speaking, but a fluent speller, and Trey is minimally and unreliably speaking. Trey also uses a letterboard, but intermittently, as he's sort of multimodality. For Evan, it's his exclusive communication method of choice. And it took 18 months for Evan to get open-ended on a 26 letterboard, meaning a board with all of the alphabet on it. I didn't really know what I was doing, so it took me a while, and I didn't have a lot of coaching until I found Elizabeth Vossler and Spelling to Communicate. So if you're here because you already know about S2C, then you're in good hands, and welcome. So let's get right into it. Without further ado, what are the 5 pitfalls? Well, the first one is called ruffling your feathers. This has to do with struggling at your age or my age with being brand new at something and not very good at it. If I could show people the footage of the very first time that I was coached as a parent on the boards with my children, it would make everybody feel better. I hated not being efficient and not being organized and not knowing how to motor plan and switch from board to board and forgetting how to spell a word in the middle of spelling it because, gosh, I'm smart, I can spell, and I put the wrong board up in front of him, and I couldn't remember to write down on the keyword sheet where he could see it or write on the transcript. And it was just very frustrating to me. And I'd get this feeling like I need to give up. I can't do this. Like the tape playing in my head all the time was, I'm not good at this. I'm never going to learn how to do this. This is really too hard for me. I can't do it. And what I know now is that having a growth mindset, if you're not familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, the Stanford-based researcher, I highly recommend her stuff, whether you listen to her book on or an audiobook or read some of the research, because there's 30 years of research on this. But having a mindset that I just can't do this yet, but I can learn how to do anything is critical to getting through this pothole, or to going around it at least. And modeling that mindset for your son or your daughter or your loved one, if you're not a parent but you're a caregiver and this is the same situation you find yourself in, is also important. Because, by the way, they are doing a really hard thing. They are learning to control their body by using their brain, which is called praxis. And that's hard for them. So we need to model in that beginning stage that, yep, we're just not good at this yet, but we're learning together. So that's the first pitfall. The second pitfall is a phrase that someone said to me once upon a time, that you just can't feather their nest. Like, there comes a point in parenting, of course, when the baby is born, right? It's all about feathering their nest and making sure all their needs are taken care of. And then if they develop autism, or always had autism, but they develop autism and suddenly they can't communicate efficiently, you continue feathering their nest long after an age when they would have been defiantly asserting their own autonomy and authority, like, no, me do, and taking the reins themselves. So we get sort of lulled into this forever feathering their nest thing and not really knowing when is a good time to pull back and let them learn, right? Let them take 5 times longer to try to tie their shoes, and whether they can actually tie their shoes. Like, are we setting them up for success or for failure? Can they motorically do that thing that we're setting them up to do? So I totally understand, and I'm super guilty of it too, and guilty is probably the wrong word. There's nothing to be ashamed about or feel bad for having done. But I would suggest that when you sit in the room that you've designated for practicing on the letterboard, you stop feathering their nest. Don't worry about whether they've had a snack, did they empty their bladder, are they upset about this other thing? Like, you go through the mental checklist that the detective mom or detective dad has learned years in, of how to make sure they're in that just right readiness position before you hand them over to the speech therapist for $130 an hour, or the OT for $130 an hour. You want them to be like just right, because that's what you can do to help make that session go really well. And then the rest is up to them, right? So you're used to feathering their nest to help make therapies go well. But now you're actually the one at home practicing the therapy. So you kind of have to stop feathering their nest and just get to the work. But I'll talk more about that later in the mindsets that are better to adopt instead of feathering their nest. The third pitfall to avoid is not nudging them out of the nest. Now, this one might seem a little confusing at first, because what I'm saying here is I run into a lot of parents who don't want to prompt. They want to just put the board down and let the kid try to poke to the letter, not understanding yet how this works and how motorically our voice prompting them in their acquisition phase is like the proverbial foot on the gas pedal of their motor. So if I put a board down, I've started the engine, I'm like, ready, and get it. And then I say nothing else, they might start moving, and then they either stall or they start just poking around because they've lost that motor plan. So in order to get them out of the nest and get them to a place where they are spelling more autonomously and you get to fade those prompts, you actually first have to fully prompt them. You have to use your voice, even if it's continuation prompts of get it, keep going, look for it, move your eyes. You have to be talking the whole time while you're working on those initial boards so that they can keep moving fluidly, because we want flow and we want rhythm. And they need our voice right now as they develop those motor pathways, as they start to connect the parts of their brain that are going to go down through their body to make their hand reach and point and their elbow stay out, and to reach and poke and lift and pull back. All of that depends on our voice coaching them. And I think we've heard so many times in IEP meetings or whatever, like, well, he's totally prompt dependent, as if that's something we've done wrong in prompting a child who has apraxia, who can't initiate without us prompting them. So we start to think in this situation, oh, we better fade those prompts as fast as possible. And that's a big mistake. So learn well what all the different prompts are from your Spelling to Communicate practitioner and use them liberally during the acquisition phase, with the exception, I would say, of gesturing if you over gesture, the only problem with that is you're going to get hooked on it. They might too, but like you will be gesturing all the time when they don't really need it. So use gestures when appropriate, but don't gesture constantly, you know? That's my only caveat to the prompting part. But everything else you need to be prompting. If you want them to flee the nest at some point and spell on their own, you can't take away the supports that are going to get them there. It's like saying, you know, someone's using a wheelchair and now they have full mobility, and then we're like, well, let's get rid of the wheelchair then, because they're making it around to all their classes. Kind of that idea. So we're not going to fade support before they truly don't need the support, and definitely get some coaching on that, because nobody in the spelling to communicate community is going to let you over prompt, believe me. Okay, the fourth pitfall, eating half the worm. So this is one that, again, might seem a little different at first. I never let a student or my son not finish a word that he started spelling. Now, that might seem like a compliance-based thing. And by the way, I'm the farthest from a compliance-based practitioner. In fact, I'm a DIR floor time practitioner, so I'm way more leaning towards the social and emotional connection and the trusting relationship and all of that. The not letting them walk away in the middle of spelling a word is actually me showing them two things. Number one, I presume competence in you, and I believe that you want to learn how to do this, no matter what your outsides show me right now. Like the fact that your body is looking like it's done. You might even be signing break or all done. And my son was notorious for this. He'd be answering a question and start signing break and all done and whatever and lying on the floor. And then it dawned on me, I asked him a question that he could have answered with one single word, and instead he started to spell a phrase, or he started to spell a sentence once we got to that place in fluency. Why would he do that? Why would he take on all those extra letters and the extra poking if he didn't want to be here doing this with me right now? So I had that moment to realize, okay, I'm going to help him finish this word, at least this word, no word left behind. I'm going to have him finish this word just as my sign to him that, buddy, I've got you. I know your body needs me to coach it, and I'm going to believe that you want to finish what you started to say, and then you might be all done because something else has triggered your sensory system or your nervous system, and that's okay, but let me help you. And I might even, it's not a compliance thing, so I might even be like, buddy, let me write it down on the dry erase board, like this is what you got so far, and let's switch to these other boards, or let's do hand over hand, or let me give you some sensory input for 10, 15 minutes, like what does your body need? But I'm going to finish that word. Let's finish that word, dude. I know you can do this. Let's do it together. I think there's a lot of times, and I've witnessed this as Evan's mom, that somebody will say something to him or they'll invite him to participate in something and he walks the other way and they immediately say, oh, he's not interested. And I'm like, oh, just because his body went that way means absolutely nothing about whether he's interested in your invitation. If I go over right now and ask him at the letter board, 8 times out of 10, he's stoked that they asked him, but his body never stops moving. So again, that phrase that the outsides don't match the insides, like when you're spelling with your son or your daughter or your loved one, just presume competence, coach their motor, and trust that they want to do this. And that if they're in the middle of spelling a word and they sign they're all done, be like, hey, you know what? Let's just finish this word because I believe in you and we're going to do it together and I'm going to help you. And it's a great bonding moment, and for them to push through maybe a little bit of dysregulation and have some top-down regulation, which we can talk about in some other webinar. Okay, the 5th pitfall that you want to avoid is plumage competitions. Like, my feathers are prettier than your feathers. Except it usually works the other way around. You think that your feathers are horrible and that everyone else's feathers are like peacock feathers and beautiful exotic birds. Social media is a blessing and a curse, right? I have friends who call Facebook fake book. I'm sure you've heard that. People post their awesome moments, right? You post about your son or your daughter who's spelling or being included in something, and it just sounds like, or at least this is the way that I used to interpret it, wow, spelling is going so easy for everybody else, right? Or so-and-so got fluent in a weekend. In fact, that actually happened to me. So my son and one of my very close girlfriend's sons both started spelling on the exact same time, this exact same weekend. Her son literally was spelling open-endedly by Sunday night. I've never heard of a faster case than this, but it happened. And then Evan took 18 months. And the first 6 months was him sliding out of the chair, could not sustain his focal vision on a letterboard for more than a half a second. So you'd have to look away every single time before he'd poke another letter, which led to a lot of mispokes. I mean, and yet to look at these two boys side by side, you would have thought, wow, I mean, they're probably similar, right? Like their motors are similar or whatnot. And it just didn't turn out that way at all. So I started always feeling like I'm doing something wrong. This isn't working for me. This isn't going to work for him. This is a waste of time. I don't want to chase another elusive white rabbit and end up with nothing at the end. Like, I'm tired, I'm tired. He was 12 years old. I'd been doing a lot of things for both the boys for a long time, but I knew that I couldn't stop looking for something that would make him an effective communicator. So I did keep on going through that, but I want to tell all of you, the plumage competitions are the easiest way to suck the joy out of your experience with your son or daughter. Like, focusing just on the moment, just on that day with your child, on this lesson, on what they have accomplished in terms of their tolerance. Some kids' sensory systems, they can't even sit in a chair. So you might spend a year spelling around a room, standing up, spelling, poking. Other kids need vision therapy on top of S2C lessons because, like Evan, they can't hold their eyes forward looking at a piece of material or a letterboard or a book for more than a second, and they need to learn how to do that. There's a lot of different reasons. You might have ordered more off the motor menu, which is something that my mentor says. Like, you might have a lot more going on motorically, and even lifting your arm to that top row on a board might take a couple of years to learn how to do. Comparing your apple to an orange to a banana is, like I said, the surest way to steal your joy. And what you need for this journey towards fluency is resiliency. You need to feel like you can do it and believe in yourself and believe in your speller. So those are the 5 pitfalls. Now, what can you do instead? Well, there are 3 mindsets that every parent who is a great spelling to communicate mom or dad knows. And the first one is that relationships grow potential. I just alluded to it in the plumage competitions, but basically, you are now entering a whole new role with your child, right? You are now, and maybe you've homeschooled before. I had done a series of, whether it was home hospital for 6 months for one, actually a year and a half for one, then 6 months for the other. I've homeschooled both of them off and on during COVID, quarantine. They were all distance learning while I was working full-time and juggling all of that. They're still distance learning, even though their schools have opened up, because actually it was started going really, really well. And so we're continuing with what's working because it's not broken, so let's not fix it. But the point is, you've had different roles, but this is the first time maybe where you're sitting down and you're going to put in your back pocket that I'm a parent right now, right? You are now teaching them how to spell to communicate. When you establish this relationship that I've got you, no matter where you go on this letterboard, like, this is one of the secret ingredients to getting fluent with your speller, is that you grow together. You grow together in this learning of how to manipulate the boards and how to read through the lessons and how to build up your tolerance for how long you can both sit and do this work, how long you can not look at your phone or think about work or do something else. For me now, sessions, whether it's with my own son or a client, are like meditation, because I get to put aside everything else that I'm doing and just focus on that moment, like literally that exact moment and what is happening with this person's body and their sensory system. And now I'm a detective in that way, where I go, ooh, I noticed this, or I've noticed they've changed position, so where am I going to put my letterboard now? And really keep honing my own skills as I work on them honing their skills. And it creates such a bond between you and your son or your daughter that I can't even describe in words what it's like, but it's like better than you ever dreamed. right? Like I wanted Evan to spell to communicate because I wanted to know the real Evan. You know, I knew the medical Evan, like I knew what his body did when I gave him this supplement or he was on this diet. I knew what his body did when he was upset generally or just not happy with what was happening. I knew what antecedents would trigger a behavior. I had figured out, I had taken data. I was a data junkie. I had taken data on everything. In fact, our gastroenterologist laughed about the spreadsheet that I used to keep, and I knew exactly what triggered what. I used to even know, if any of you do any of this biomedical stuff, I used to even know what pathogens would have overgrown in his stool culture based on what his body was doing as far as ticks. It could be purely anecdotal, but there was complete correlation for me. So anyway, that's how much data I took, because what else was I going to do as I was trying to figure him out? And the truth was, what I really wanted to know is the stuff I know now, which is he loves hip hop and rap music, and that actually he wants to be a math major and go to college. Like his big dream in life is actually college. And he said, I don't know what I can do with a math degree, but that's what I want to do. He loves his little brother, which shocked me, to be really honest with you, because his little brother was very territorial, always took his stuff, you know, things like that. And his brother used to actually garner most of our family's resources in terms of energy and attention. And so I thought Evan would be jealous and kind of, you know, resentful, and no, like he's super compassionate about his brother and loves him, which made me so happy because they're probably going to be roommates someday. So it's nice to know that's not going to be unpleasant for Evan. Anyway, I get to know all this through the letter board, and I get to know this because we trudged through resiliently those initial stages where he was dropping on the floor, which, by the way, turned out to be because two things. He was needing deep tactile input at that point, and that's a nice passive way to get it. Secondly, his vision, his peripheral vision and his focal vision were not integrated. So for Evan, as soon as he started looking at the letter board, his peripheral vision would shut off versus stay integrated, and he'd start to lose where his body was in space. And so laying on the floor would actually ground his system, and then he'd get back up and be ready to go again. So here I was initially assuming he's being non-compliant, quote unquote, although that's not a word that I typically use, but doesn't want to do this. He's being difficult. He's just trying to get a rise out of me. And it was 100% related to his sensory motor differences. And the mistake and the damage I would have done, I mean, I did do it a couple of times where one time I literally looked at him and was like, Evan, I am your only hope. And I didn't say it that calmly. I'm like, get up. Because I've been working so hard to carve out these windows to spell with him. And here it was because he was doing the very best that he could for his body. So this first mindset, know that the relationship you're cultivating is what's going to grow their potential as a speller. Focusing on the relationship first and foremost is what's going to get you the fluency between you guys as communication partners. So that's mindset number one. Mindset number two is that forgetting you're a parent. No parents on the letterboard. So put that in your back pocket. That's what that little emoji, if you will, or drawing is on the slide. Put that skill set, that very well-honed, data-taking, detective-like skill set into your back pocket and just be a communication partner. Be the best darn communication partner you can be, but don't worry about it. If they have to pee, they will literally escape the room and go pee, I think. Probably. My son would. You can't make him spell, right? You can't make a kid spell, and you really can't make a kid eat. And those are the two things that I've noticed over the years that I cannot force my child to do even when I want him to. So I need him to want to do those things. And my job is to make it pleasant and not a controlling situation. And so I don't want to be a parent. I don't want to be a disciplinarian. I don't want to scold them for what they're doing in that moment, no matter what behavior they do. And by behavior, I just mean some action they're taking with their body. I don't care if they're getting out of their chair. I don't care if they're laying on the floor. I don't care if they're actually spitting something at me. Now, I might actually turn to them and say, that's not really civilized, but I'm going to coach their motor. I'm going to go back to being like, okay, this is that top-down regulation. I'm going to distract your body from whatever is going on right now by giving you a math problem to do. And I'm going to direct them with some higher level thinking that will engage their brain. And then typically they can gain more motor control over their body. So forget that you're a parent for the 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever you've committed to as your spelling to communicate lesson at home. Forget you're a parent. Shut that door, turn off your parent, leave it on the outside. It'll make your job easier. You won't have to think so much about, oh my gosh, they didn't sleep well last night. That's really why we should probably end this session early. Like, it just simplifies your decision making, and simply coach the motor. And last, but definitely not least, do not go this alone. You need to find your flock. So this photograph is with a couple of moms who are, their sons or clients of mine. One mom has 2 boys who spell to communicate, the other has 1. This was from what was going to be our annual New Year's Eve bash here at Transcending Autism and Apraxia. It was an unbelievable sensation as we rolled in 2020. We did a silent disco and everyone came together in our space. It was amazing. And obviously the moms all had fun too. These moms I've known since before I was an S2C practitioner. I actually met them when I was doing floor time exclusively, and I did floor time sessions with their boys. Nowadays, thanks to social media, there's no reason to go it alone. Even if you don't know any other spellers in your local community, you can connect to them via the internet. And that might be one other blessing from COVID, is that now all of these things that are happening online have been made more available even to spellers. And people wait for spellers to communicate their message on Zoom calls, and I love that. It's so anti-ableist. And there's just more opportunities for all of us to stay connected. You need that. You need to talk to other families and other parents so that when things feel frustrating, you have support. Find an S2C practitioner near you so that you can get some coaching, even if it's a video feedback where they look at a video that you take at home and you send it to them for some coaching. It will sustain you when you get into your head and think, I don't know what I'm doing. Why isn't this going well? Like, are we plateaued? Am I doing something wrong? Just don't go it alone. We're not meant to go things alone. We're communal beings by nature. And that's kind of the joy in becoming a speller today, is that there's so many more non-speakers who already have found their voice and are paving the way for kids like ours to now have a community that understands them. So those were the 3 mindsets. What are the benefits of this mindset? I love this word, a convenient sense of serenity during your sessions. I don't know when serenity is not convenient, but it's definitely convenient to just be zen, sit in your session, coach the motor, and know that every little thing is going to be all right. Hence my tattoo, by the way. The second thing is consistent expectations of yourself and your child. They know you're going to coach their motor. They know you're not quitting till those 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes are up. Even if that means you just read to them. If they literally won't spell, you just continue reading the lesson to them, and every now and then see if you can get another spelling word out of them. But just don't give up on them. They know that's what's going to be happening. You know what you're expecting of yourself. It will lead, after you get through the initial hump, it will lead to much smoother practice sessions at home. Don't give up. Never, ever, ever, ever give up. And then last but not least, that deeper connection through learning something together. I watch this over and over again. I'm so blessed to do the work that I do and get to coach parents. I try really hard to get parents on letterboards during my sessions. When I start with a student, usually by the 3rd or 4th session, I want moms or dads to do at least a paragraph during the time that they come to see me so that I boost their confidence and so that I don't get too much further along in fluency with their child than they are. My whole goal is to work myself out of a job with you and your child. I want you to be able to do this all at home yourself. So I'm going to teach your child the skills, and I want to teach you the skills at the same time so that you can talk to your children all day, every day, not wait for your appointment with me or with another S2C practitioner. And the connection that you get to develop, that knowing that real person inside who's there waiting to reveal itself inside your daughter or your son is priceless because you waited for this, right? Like, nobody knows but another parent. People can empathize, but like nobody really knows unless they've been there, when you finally get to hear a novel thought out of your child for the first time. My son answered a question that I was sitting there with a colleague when the practitioner asked him on the letterboard. They had done a poem together, and she said, "What's another word for God's love?" And I looked at my friend and I said, like, "Do you know another word for God's love?" She's like, "I don't know." And Evan spelled benevolent. And I was like, oh, goodness gracious. Like, I've always presumed competence. Like, I'm here, right? When you bring your kid to an S2C session, you're presuming some competence. You're like, I want to see if this is going to help him. You're believing they might be able to do this. But I realized in that moment, I still might have been underestimating him. He was 12 years old and he used a word like benevolent. That changed everything. That one word changed everything for me. 6 months later, he had his first open phrase with that same person who had come back to town. And he spelled something that she said, "Oh, no, I don't think that's whatever." And she wrote it down. And I just happened to say across the room, "Oh, I think he was trying to say blah, blah, blah." And Evan picks up the board and spells, "My mom is smart." And I thought, that's the first thing he's ever said to me. My mom is smart. Anyway, those two things carried me for an entire year until I finally got Evan to where he could spell open-endedly on his own. And I just want you to know that nothing is worth doing more than committing to this process and believing in yourself and garnering the resources that you need. By resources, I mean time, energy, support, coaching, just friends who are doing this too, a Facebook group, whatever it is, so that you don't feel like you're alone on this journey. Because you're not alone, and everyone is here, and we've got your back, and I can't wait to hear about your son or your daughter and how they're progressing on their journey. Well, that brings to a close our webinar on the 5 pitfalls to avoid as a new spelling parent. Hopefully, as you listen to the 3 mindsets, maybe one of them jumped out to you as a solution to one of the pitfalls you found yourself in. If you could relate to one of those pitfalls specifically right now with what you're going through, maybe consider which of those things, whether it's focusing on the relationship, whether it's putting your parenting mindset into your back pocket while spelling, or finding your flock. Maybe think of one action item that you can write down right now on a piece of paper, on a Post-it note, that you might take in the next week in order to have a different experience in this stage of your spelling journey. It's been a pleasure sharing my experience with you, and Evan is happy to share his experience with you. He gave full permission for me to tell the stories that I did about him. He even selected the photo that I used in the beginning of the webinar for his face down modeling status. Anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. My email is transcendingautism@gmail.com, or you can go right to my website, which is transcendingautismandapraxia.com. Thanks so much, and I look forward to speaking with you.